Still digging out of a hole today, consequence of time off. But who cares? Reuters. The FAA says normal air traffic is, quote unquote, resuming gradually across the US after its notice to air missions system failed. According to FlightAware, over 32,000 flights were delayed. That's not good. Though, I don't know, I was going to say kudos to the FAA for being transparent about the fact that some software failure was the cause of the problem. But who knows how many times there's been a software failure that hasn't been communicated. Again, America is a big place, and so I understand that there are issues with regard to making rail service a viable alternative to air travel. But I have to just wonder how many more decades are going to pass before our elected officials and us as a group coalesce around the idea that it's not tenable, especially in a place as large as America, for there to be no middle option. You can either pilot your own automobile at, call it 75 miles an hour, although maintaining an average of 75 miles an hour over, say, the distance between San Francisco and Los Angeles, or New York and Washington, D.C., quite difficult. There's no middle option between that or getting on an airplane. That doesn't hold a lot of water. When I was a kid, I got to go to Europe and was meeting my girlfriend at the time in Paris, and I was in London. I was visiting family, friends, and so I was going to take the train under the channel under the channel from one to the other. I got to the train station late. I think I left from Paddington, although I don't remember. And I was totally freaked out because I'm an American, and in my world, if you get to the station and there's only 15 minutes before the vehicle you're going to get on is supposed to leave, you're hosed, right? In an airline context, you're hosed, you're done for. And so I stepped up to the counter with this, how much is it going to cost? Like, how many hundreds of dollars do I have to hand you to get on the next available thing that I'm sure will be hours from now? And communicating with my partner was a difficult thing to do because smartphones weren't really a thing. And of course, the ticket agent just said, no, you don't have to pay any extra. You bought a ticket from here to there. The next train leaves in 10 minutes. Go right ahead. You cannot tell me that it would not take a material chunk of the airline industry's business to be able to offer a experience that allows you to get between San Francisco and Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., to say nothing of many other point-to-point journeys between population centers that offered that level of just convenience, to say nothing of the fact that it's a network that would allow other cities to be served, or the fact that it would create price pressure on airlines and vice versa, I'm sure. When are we going to figure this out? I don't know, but we need to. Mark Gurman, Bloomberg. Sources: Apple plans to design and develop its own displays for mobile devices, starting with micro LED screens for the Apple Watch Ultra by the end of 2024. I don't have perfect recall, but I'm fairly sure a story almost identical to this was published 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Might have been before the pandemic, might have been during, I don't remember. But this notion that they're going to manufacture their own displays and put them into the watch, I suppose maybe the first story was about manufacturing a display that allowed them to ship an always-on display in the watch. Maybe that's what I'm recalling. But it does feel repetitive. But that said, this to me, far more interesting than let's ship a device that has two screens and some cameras that you wear over your face and take you out of the real world. To me, it's much more interesting to watch Apple continue to move deeper down the stack in pursuit of building the products that already have use cases that are obvious, defensible, successful to the company in terms of accruing value, building your own displays, and then building your own baseband chipsets. This is the other one. I feel like I saw a story about this at some point in the last couple of weeks. Maybe it was this week, about rather than having to buy the components that are responsible for connecting the device to a cellular network from Samsung, Intel, Qualcomm. Maybe Samsung's not there, maybe it's Intel and Qualcomm. But nonetheless, building those things yourself to exactly the specification that your products require, that's how you get competitive advantage in such a mature business as shipping products that have LCD displays or LED displays and cellular radios. So I hope that this is true. I hope they make a big deal about it when they ship it, because this is how they become, or continue to be, rather, the best consumer electronics business ever. Nicolesh Day, CoinDesk. A bankruptcy attorney says FTX recovered more than $5 billion in cash, crypto, and securities, not including $425 million held by the Bahamas, or quote unquote illiquid cryptocurrency tokens. Related, Financial Times, court documents. Sam Bankman-Fried invested $20 million in Paradigm's $2.5 billion Paradigm One fund in late 2021, before the fund then invested in FTX and FTX US. Also related, Jeremy Hill, Bloomberg, court documents. New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft, NFL star Tom Brady, a Peter Thiel-linked trust, and more own FTX Group stock, now considered worthless. Crypto Malarkey, the intersection in particular of Crypto Malarkey and finance malarkey. It's a better phrase there somewhere. People who primarily make their money with money as opposed to with labor, with capital versus with labor. I just see a recurring pattern over the years and decades of sort of investing in one another, right? I have capital, I need to put it to work. You're in a slightly different capital allocation business than I am, so I'll put some of my money into your hands, and you'll go do what you do in the capital markets, and I'll go do what I do. And in theory, we'll all benefit. Problem is, when one of you absolutely shits the bed, everyone is covered in shit. So Tom Brady is going to take a bath. Apparently some of Peter Thiel's holdings are going to take a bath. Robert Kraft is going to take a bath. The bad news for those of us who think that capital allocators are not really playing a fair game is that I highly doubt any of these people are going to go from being hyper wealthy to not hyper wealthy. They'll realize some losses, but are any of them going to stop flying private? I doubt it, except of course for SBF. He may be on a non-commercial flight at some point in the future, but it's more of a one-way trip. It's my anticipation. Mitchell Clark, The Verge. Twitter renames latest tweets to following and home to For You, making the algorithmic feed the default with no option to change it, rolling out on iOS first. Not a surprising product change. Fundamentally, Twitter's success as a business rests on engagement, and were I in the hypothetical room where it's decided whether or not the software should default to a feed that has the benefit of computer science and engineering behind it in order to further engagement, or whether it should be entirely user controlled, frankly, I don't know where I would place my chips in that scenario, because I am confident that for many users, you will ultimately drive greater engagement with the platform as a whole if you don't leave it up to those users to explicitly choose what content they see and in what order they see it, because a huge part of following versus For You is following is, at least traditionally, reverse chronological. Most recent stuff's at the top. As you scroll down, it gets older. This is part of the reason, for those of you who have used third-party Twitter clients, there's always a feature that says, keep my place, because some people are feed completionists and they want to be able to read everything, which means they want to stop at a particular point in the feed and then come back later and keep going. If you're consuming an algorithmic feed, not entirely necessary, nor would I imagine is it an engineering priority to facilitate keeping your place. So, is it a bummer that you can't set the default the way you used to? Yeah, I'm an old enough Twitter user and an old enough user of feeds that I generally prefer RevCron. I don't really want to put it into the algorithm's hands to decide what I see and what I don't. That said, having used the latest build, latest beta build that's floating around, getting net new content from accounts that I don't explicitly follow is a good thing, right? It does make it stickier. It makes you want to return to it. And again, all of this fundamentally revolves around Twitter as a business, and the Twitter app as the primary portal for experiencing what the business has to offer, which is other people's content. It'll be interesting to see, assuming this change sticks, whether third-party clients are able to offer a default or whether the API will restrict that. We shall see. McKenna Kelly, The Verge, sources. Parler's parent company laid off around 75% of its staff and most of its chief executives over the past few weeks, leaving the social app with around 20 employees. If you thought Elon's version of hardcore software engineering was gnarly, let's see how long you can run a competitor to Twitter with 20 people. I think, I'll put it this way, I will be shocked if Parler is a going concern 90 days from now, if not less. And, to connect this, again, to the sort of thread revolving around social media, social networking products, Twitter, network effects are real, right? Like, there were other electronics standards for connecting groups of desktop computers so that file sharing and other applications could, work, be brought into being to exist. There were other networking standards than IP. There were Novell networks. There was Apple Talk. Those things lost because the community of people that used those devices over time came to the realization that, came to two realizations. Number one, while no standard is perfect, there is a least horrible option that exists. And number two, our experience is better if more of us can interoperate. I know this is software and not hardware, but quite frankly, I don't think this is any different. You can loathe Twitter for a whole host of completely valid reasons, but the more of the people you want to interact with exist there, as an individual user, you find yourself put to this choice of like, I either engage in that system or I don't interact with a whole cohort of human beings, many of whom are very important to me. I walked away from Instagram a long time ago, and there are a number of relationships with people I love dearly that effectively vanished because I'm not spending my time where they choose to spend their time, again, in terms of social networking products. Now that Instagram offers a messaging product, maybe I should reinvest in it. Maybe the stories format makes more sense to me, or would be easier to deal with. But Like, there's only so much sort of psycho-emotional energy that one can dedicate to an infinity pool of content. Borrowing that phrase from someone, their name escapes me right now, but tools that have no defined edges in terms of, is there more to consume? I don't think most people have room in their lives for more than one of those things. I could be wrong, but it certainly would seem that Parler's not going to be an option to choose from in the relatively near future. And it would not surprise me if a significant percentage of the user base that Parler built up reappear on Twitter. And regardless of what stereotypes you may have built up in your head about the average user of Parler, and therefore whether they're some sort of net positive or net negative on the pool of people who use Twitter, don't lose sight of the goal here. The goal is to get everybody onto a protocol so that you can choose what group of people you want to associate with. And if there are groups of people that you want to actively put up boundaries to protect yourself from, you should be able to do that as well, of course. But to me, the prerequisite in order to get to that place is you need a standard which is the least bad of all of them. And we don't have that yet. We don't have a protocol yet, but I individually am willing to plant the flag and say Twitter is the best of all of them. And it has more to do with how one chooses to use it than whether one place is better than another. I mean, I had the thought the other night while I was making dinner, like, you could teach a class on how to take someone that doesn't use a tool like Twitter or a tool like Instagram or anything else and get them from 0 to 1 and educate them so that they have some level of discernment about how they engage. Frankly, if you grant the premise that people at remarkably young ages are choosing to use tools like this, then teaching how to do so responsibly probably is a good idea if you're a parent. But again, I'm way far from the fact that Parler, good try. Zach Bowden, Windows Central. Sources: Microsoft ditched a dual screen design for the Surface Duo 3, opting for an internal foldable screen, an external cover display, and a 180-degree hinge. I'm super stoked on Microsoft continuing to push the form factors of computers. The fact that they're genuinely trying to build styles of what we call smartphones, but they're computers. They are the computer that everybody carries around. They're the computer that people reach for more than any other. The fact that they're playing with different shapes in order to see whether or not that has any impact on how people use them, I think that's totally awesome. And to the extent that I want to carry around some screen that is small enough to be put in a pocket. I would absolutely love for that thing to fold in half in order to get smaller. And the inverse is also true, to unfold in order to become larger. I want those things to exist in the world. I think they should. And so the fact that the business is being funded within the company, because again, it's not existential to Microsoft's business. They sell laptops, but something tells me if the entire Surface hardware unit had to disappear tomorrow, it would not cause Microsoft to cease to be. So I'm super excited to see this thing. That it runs Android, not super thrilling to me, but I don't know, maybe they're the ones that could convince me to use an Android device because the form factor is so much more compelling than anything Apple seems willing to build. Binance admits flaws in maintaining its Paxos managed BUSD stablecoin, which should be backed 1-to-1. Chain Argos BUSD was under collateralized by over $1 billion in 2020 to 2021. The Crypto Malarkey never stops. Notion of a stablecoin is pegged to an item of fiat currency, a unit of fiat currency. So the idea there is that for every dollar, if you will, for every individual BUSD coin that's floating around on the net, that Binance holds $1. And apparently there were over $1 billion short between 2020 and 2021. Not good. Allison Johnson, The Verge. Samsung sets its next Galaxy Unpacked event for February 1st at 10 a.m. Pacific in San Francisco. Its first in-person event in 3 years, likely to unveil the Galaxy S23. As someone who moves in more Apple-centric circles, Samsung events aren't particularly exciting. The fact that it's in person, I suppose that's a good thing. I'd like to live in a world where we, as a species, can gather in indoor spaces in large numbers and have everybody walk away as healthy as when they arrived. So, crossing my fingers for y'all. The only other thing, though, that's particularly interesting to me here is in the Apple-centric universe, there is a relatively low-key but persistent conversation, which is, are they really just going to keep incrementing the numbers? Like, aren't the numbers going to sound silly at some point? The number for the iteration of the phone or the number for the iteration of the operating system. Samsung's up to 23. They show no sign of being tired of it. So, I don't know, maybe it's not going to be a problem until we have to break into the 3-digit integer space. Maybe everybody's going to be totally hyped for the iPhone 34 Uh, Amanda Pedersen, medical device and diagnostic industry. A U.S. ITC judge rules that some Apple Watches infringe on one of 5 Masimo pulse oximeter patents related to using light sensors to measure blood oxygen levels. I would not anticipate that this results in anything more than a fine that Apple pays, and that's the end of it. Um, so I'll be curious to see if this story comes up again at any point in the future, or whether this is the cost of doing business when you're a small business that creates a fundamentally useful technological innovation that then the apex predator of your business um, decides that it wants, which is it takes the idea, and then if it gets caught at some point down the road, which that's what this is, then it pays a fine. But make no mistake, the idea that uh, blood pulse oximeter functionality leaves the Apple Watch as a result of this ruling just strikes me as extremely unlikely. Javier Espinoza, Financial Times. How Section 19A of Germany's Competition Act gives antitrust authorities the power to divest and sanction big tech as the EU slowly rolls out its enforcement. This would be a good thing to read. I think I'm going to mark this one for my reading queue, because the European Union, whether you like it or not, is more capable, more willing, a little bit of both, to make moves that US companies are obligated to conform to the extent that they want to do business in Europe, which is an absolute at this point. Best example here from was reported beginning of December, I think, that they're going to force, well, they have changed laws such that if Apple wants to sell iPhones in Europe, which again, they kind of have to, they don't have to, but their business would suffer greatly if they did not, so they kind of have to, are going to have USB-C connectors built into them. And Apple's executives make all the right noises in public to complain about how being forced to do that is bad for innovation, which all gets sourced back to sort of a root argument, which is we know best, don't tell us how to build products. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but let's be clear, getting to a world where every device can be plugged into the same shape of connector in order to recharge the battery, that's the right world to live in. Like, I don't care about your opinions on what's best for this product. This product exists within a context of human beings are carrying around computers that need to have their batteries charged. And it's a better world when everyone's computer can be charged with the same type of connector. Like Tesla, for all the praise that anyone could heap on Tesla, um, has a proprietary charging network that is the envy of many electric vehicle manufacturers. I don't know, because I don't own a Tesla, whether or not you can pull a Tesla up to a non-Tesla charging point and charge it. I believe that you can. It's just a matter of adapters. Dongles come for everyone. Or, but I'm relatively certain that the opposite is absolutely not possible. You cannot pull a non-Tesla vehicle up to a Tesla charge point and charge it. I could be wrong, but my understanding is that's not possible. That's lame. That hurts the adoption of electric vehicles. And yes, of course, you could make the claim that, like, if you believe that Tesla's charging network is so great, then you should go buy a Tesla. Okay, fine, but not everybody's going to own a Tesla. Not everybody's going to own an iPhone. So this is a scenario where I agree with the European Union's regulation. What exactly, what power they're given, divest and sanction, that'll be extremely interesting to see going forward. So again, one to read carefully. Jai Vijayan, dark reading. Microsoft releases 98 security fixes, patching 11 critical vulnerabilities, and an actively exploited privilege escalation zero-day flaw in Windows ALPC. I don't know what ALPC refers to. I don't know what flavor of Windows that is. But apparently a somewhat noteworthy, what do we call it, Patch Tuesday. There's an internal term at Microsoft because security fixes like these always dropped on Tuesdays. You know, today is Wednesday. Something tells me this was announced yesterday. But maybe that's a total fever dream and there was no such thing as Patch Tuesday. This is the curse of being the dominant traditional operating system vendor, is that you're going to spend some percentage of your energy as a business just closing bugs forever. So I would love to buy a beer for anyone who's up in Redmond or anywhere for that matter doing this largely thankless work, because, well, don't get me wrong, closing actively exploited flaws in Windows is serious business. It's not the sort of thing that excites your user base. It excites a very particular kind of user, which is the sort of sysadmin who's obligated to deal with the flaws in Windows in this example. But again, good for you. I'm sorry that you have this curse of being the dominant platform vendor. Kyle Wiggers, TechCrunch. In a Discord post, OpenAI says it's quote unquote starting to consider monetizing ChatGPT, possibly via ChatGPT Professional polls members on payment preferences and more. Where was it? I think it was the All In podcast. The burn rate at OpenAI is apparently quite significant. And so not surprising that they're beginning to explore how to monetize this thing that they've built. To me, though, the more interesting story is that a business, which, if we remember from last week, is being valued around $30 billion today, is communicating and soliciting feedback from its user base via Discord. Discord, great product, useful in a wide variety of circumstances. I personally bristle at using it. I just find like chat interfaces like Discord, like Slack, like others, to be sort of new and shiny, but my personal bet is in the long arc of time will not show themselves to actually be any more useful than email. The labor of keeping up with everything that happens in an active Discord server is significant. And because it's all chat, it's not as easy to deal with the influx if you've stepped away from your screen for an extended period of time, the way it is with email. But I'm an old guy. That's my point of view. I'll be interested to see what their monetization strategy looks like. These public expressions of what OpenAI's products are capable of have certainly been popular. Where that popularity brushes up against utility that someone is willing to spend money on will be a very different story. Angus Lowton, Wall Street Journal. Analysts say Salesforce's customers do not seem to be swayed by Slack. The messaging services revenue growth declined from 11.7% in Q1 2022 to 6.9% in Q3 2022. Here we go. Discord, Slack. I mean, if you're examining Slack's position in the marketplace today, you have to talk about Teams, because that's how both of these products, that's what their go-to-market strategy is at this point, is they're not sold on their own merits. Maybe in some edge cases, there are businesses which don't have any product like this and don't have any pre-existing relationship with a Salesforce or a Microsoft. And the shininess of Teams or Slack is enough of a draw that that's what gets them in the door. But again, I would wager that those are the exception and not the rule. My guess is the rule is businesses which already have relationships with Microsoft or with Salesforce. Some of them see enough appeal in a Teams product or a Slack product for whatever reasons that they're willing to sort of take that part of the offering in and integrate it into their business. The difficulty here, and for my money, the best thing to go read on this subject is Cal Newport's A World Without Email, is that the culture shift necessary to move from whatever your team has been relying on to communicate, whether that's email, whether that's a group text or a series of group texts. Never underestimate the lowest common denominator mediums. To migrate all of the way the culture interacts into this net new product, it's just a big lift. It's like it takes time. I work in a bar. That bar uses Teams. There can't be more than a dozen sort of business operators at the top of that hierarchy. And yet, when I interact with any of them as a bartender, it's still a significant percentage of the time that I just get a text rather than use Teams, even though we're all the same Rolodex, and all it takes is to go look somebody up. It's still a difficult thing to change people's behavior patterns. And so for the organizations that have already integrated Slack and have already done that cultural work, I'm sure it will continue to be sticky. And to the extent that Salesforce integrates the rest of their offerings into Slack and vice versa, that's good for Salesforce, right? You increase the ARPU. I think that's the right use of that term. But are you going to find new customers for this thing that, let's face facts, it's a chat room. It is a series of chat rooms. It is ICQ, if you're old like me, rebuilt, reimagined, improved for a modern era, which is not to say that there's zero utility in a tool like that. But is that what you need? Like, what is the job you're hiring a chat room product to solve in your business? Again, if you're a super small business and you're just running like a handful of like bars and restaurants, and you've got 20 people or fewer that all need to communicate on a regular basis, I'm sure that's probably a perfectly reasonable application of something like Teams. But that said, I'm not convinced that it's even that much better than email. But that could just be the old guy talking. Olga Karov, Bloomberg. Cameron Winklevoss demands that DDG's board remove CEO Barry Silbert and alleges he and Genesis lied publicly after his January 8th resolution deadline passed. This is just more crypto malarkey, and I don't have the horses for any more of that today. Richard Waters, Financial Times. After Chinese researchers claimed to break RSA encryption using quantum computers, experts are skeptical and caution that any commercial benefits are years away. I'm not well educated enough to speak on RSA encryption in particular, or on the relationship between pre-existing forms of encryption and quantum computing. But I do feel like I can say with some confidence that this coming moment where we have operable computing machines which are capable of rendering significant percentages of the codes or ciphers, to use the traditional term, for protecting communications, that's going to be a big deal. And it's important that we pay attention to it. So I'll be bookmarking this one as well. It'll go well with Neil Stephenson's Cryptonomicon, which I'm currently working my way through. John Brodkin, Ars Technica. Nevada's U.S. senators claim the FCC's new broadband maps, which will be used to allocate $42.45 billion in grants, are filled with mistakes and overstate coverage. The fact that there's unfortunately not a strong market demand for driving a greater quality of terrestrial, landline, broadband internet access across America is exceedingly unfortunate, because it then becomes a political issue. I don't know, because I have not kept up with what the FCC claims it will be doing to better the state of broadband availability in America. But something tells me what they won't do is encourage municipalities to own the network, the hardware layer, and then lease the rights to run a business on top of that infrastructure to private businesses. Something tells me in America what's going to happen here, regardless of what the esteemed senators from the great state of Nevada have to say, is the cable that goes into the ground is going to be owned by some private business, whether it's AT&T or Layer 3, are they still in business? Who knows? That they're going to own those things, and they're going to control them according to a shareholder benefit principle, rather than the people of the state of Nevada owning the wire that allows them to connect to the rest of the world, which, for my money, is the better option. But we'll see. Stephen Church, Bloomberg. A U.S. bankruptcy judge approves Voyager's plan to sell its crypto platform to Binance US for $20 million, overruling objections from federal regulators and some states. Again, more crypto malarkey. I'm out of gas on that for today. Wall Street Journal. Sources. Netflix restricts some staff's ability to see other employees' salaries, a major shift for a company that has long offered rare pay transparency. This is interesting, if for no other reason than, to me, illustrates if you have not encoded the guidelines through which your organization operates, or with which, then it's simply a matter of the right set of circumstances before those guidelines are disregarded. If Netflix has historically offered pay transparency and now is restricting, removing some of that transparency. To me, all that shows is that the business is not quite as rosy in terms of outlook as it was before. And so the operators of the business are beginning to change some of its guidelines. Tyler Coates, The Hollywood Reporter. Netflix plans to stream the SAG Awards globally starting in 2024 as part of a multi-year deal. The 2023 ceremony will stream on Netflix's YouTube channel. This, on the other hand, a more interesting story about Netflix. Moving into live content is in many ways sort of the last area for Netflix to expand. And starting with the Screen Actors Guild Awards strikes me as an element of sort of service to the community, which has made Netflix what it is, which are screen actors. So it's interesting that they're starting there. It's also interesting that in making the deal, they were able to get this year's ceremony, and they're going to put it on YouTube. If I had to guess, I would place all my chips on, because they don't have the infrastructure to do it themselves yet. YouTube does. YouTube can show exactly the same thing in real time to, I have no idea how many people, but I don't think that there are many businesses that are able to compete with YouTube's capabilities there. And so, good for Netflix to get out in front to make this deal realized as soon as possible. It'll be an interesting bit of marketing jujitsu to have the experience of watching the SAG Awards happen on YouTube, but to have to brand it as brought to you by Netflix so that you can plant the seed in the heads of viewers that Netflix is what provides you the ability to watch this award show. So, smart move on their part. I hope it works for them. Taylor Hatmaker, TechCrunch. Meta plans to further limit ad targeting users under 18 starting in February 2023, including removing the option to target based on gender and in-app activity. I would love to be positive about this news. Targeting advertising at users, human beings, under the age of 18, arguably the morally right thing to do. Of course, the problem is you can't stop the 17, 16, 15, 14, 13-year-old from aspiring to be like the 18-year-old. So the advertising, which is targeted at legal adults, it's still going to get to people who are under the age of 18. But that's not the reason that my gut tells me to be pessimistic. The reason my gut tells me to be pessimistic is I just find it incredibly unlikely that while Meta may prevent its customers, which is to say advertisers, from targeting these groups of users who are under the legal age of 18, I don't believe that Meta will apply those rules to themselves. I believe that Meta will continue to do everything it possibly can to engineer its product experiences to be as sticky as possible for as young a user as possible, because then they can monetize that user's engagement at some point in the future. I don't believe that they're going to engineer a system where they throw out information about users under the age of 18. I just believe they're going to advantage themselves with that information, and then there'll be a nice little ramp until the moment the software thinks the user is 18, because if you haven't been keeping score, 16-year-olds know how to tell a piece of software that they're actually 18. But as soon as the software thinks they're 18, then game on. Great. Matt Levine, Bloomberg. The deep problem with SPACs is the sponsors and warrant holders' cuts paid by the target company or the SPAC shareholders, leading to a bad deal for both. This isn't, strictly speaking, crypto malarkey. It's finance malarkey, capital malarkey. Still, there's a term there. I don't know exactly what it is. But SPACs, my understanding, are the sort of legal construct that allows a private business to go public, become a publicly traded business through some means that is different from the traditional initial public offering method of accomplishing the same thing. I suppose I should learn what a SPAC is, because it does seem to be a new component, a new mechanic on the game board. But right now, I don't have anything else to say. Nilay Patel, The Verge. Cory Doctorow and law professor Rebecca Giblin on their new book, Chokepoint Capitalism, and how tech platforms monetize creators via distribution bottlenecks. I remember from before the pandemic, Shoshana Zuboff's Surveillance Capitalism being a quite popular book. This strikes me, if for no other reason but the title, as the coda or the sort of partner to that book. Because, yeah, people who create content and distribute it over the network are they are how the network operators, the distributors, make money and become such powerful businesses. YouTube is YouTube for a couple of reasons. One, they have currently the best tech stack, the best product for providing a means of distribution of video content. they also have the network effect, which is it's where everybody else is placing their content for distribution. And as such, they make significant money off of that. And while I'm sure that this book will go into great detail pointing out the sort of usury relationship that can exist between an individual human being who's creating content that people want and the audience who want it, YouTube's sort of an interesting example here. It's not immaterial to take a piece of high definition video, right? The final file for this instance of me reading you the news is measured in gigabytes. And like it's between I think it's average between like 4 and 8 gigabytes for 45 minutes or whatever I usually land on here. That's a material amount of data. If you want to make that available to one other person, well, then you're going to use, on average, 5 gigabytes worth of transport over the network, which doesn't sound like a lot. What happens when that one viewer goes to 2? It doubles. What happens when those 2 viewers go to 4 and then to 16? And then, right, like you get the point. The extent to which an individual becomes, the content that they produce becomes more popular very quickly outstrips an individual's ability to distribute that content to a significant audience. And so I don't know what the next version of tools for distributing 45 minutes of me reading you the news looks like, but YouTube seems to me to have a perfectly adequate or sort of reasonable relationship in terms of the economic side. In terms of, do the videos that I create get delivered to every individual who wants them delivered? That's a place where we could all critique YouTube and where there are, sort of other arguments to be had. But I'll reserve judgment. It'll be an interesting book to read maybe maybe it's a book for next month. Who knows? But for now, that's all I've got to say.